Hello everyone and welcome to my B&B Fan Club channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The episode began with Steffi repeatedly reminding Luna that her baby is a kid, not an escape plan. In response, Luna labeled Steffi self-absorbed for believing she was still a threat and stated that her stepmother would be the last thing on her mind once she was sprung. Furthermore, she was convinced that Bill and Katie would not allow their grandchild to be born behind bars. "Do you think you know Bill?" "You don't," Steffi advised Luna, explaining that the baby did not transform the nut job into Spencer, but rather into a predator. Still, Steffi did not go so far as to term Luna's actions against Will rape. Why does this show openly say that she is a murderer but not a rapist? Strange. Katie makes excuses for Bill at the Spencer mansion. Will was concerned that the Luna problem was asking too lot of Electra. Bill told him, however, that the Luna of it all would be over in 9 months. By that time, she would have no contact with Will or the kid. The businessman said that he had spoken with a lawyer and was certain that the custody battle will be resolved. And with those remarks, may he have jinxed himself even more? Talk about courting fate. Katie and Will recounted everything that had happened to disrupt Bill's romance with Electra after he had left. Katie used pretzel logic to excuse her ex-husband's deception at Luna's hands. Katie stated that he feels quite guilty. He's not gonna let her brainwash him again. Foreshadowing? You betcha. Bill lights into Luna after Steffi left the prison. Luna was surprised to see she had another visitor. "Bill. Is it only you?" she asked. "Yeah, she's so delulu, she imagined Will would come to see her." As if. Bill, sounding like the dollar bill of old, gruffly remarked that Luna's pregnancy had created no link between her and his family. In fact, he stated that as soon as the baby was delivered, he would take it from her. "The biggest mistake of my life," he hissed, "was believing you had any chance of atonement. I should have left you in here to fester." Bill wasn't finished either. He would employ the same influence that he had used to liberate Luna to guarantee that she never stopped pressing license plates. How did she respond? The Luna version of the sad face emoji shown above. Ridge and Taylor rush inside the Cliff home to find Steffi, only to learn from Finn that their daughter had gone straight to prison to confront Luna. While waiting for Steffi to arrive, her husband and parents discussed her reaction to the Luna news, as well as how understanding she was that no one had informed her about the surprise she'd be receiving when she returned home. When Steffi returned, she was startlingly unconcerned about her father having dumped her mother and remarried Brooke while she was away. First, that is. Steffi eventually expressed her dismay, albeit in far milder terms than we would have expected or hoped for. "Daddy certainly gets away with stuff." Luna's cellmate beats her up. Not for the first time as the program came to a conclusion, Steffi remarked that her spouse is attractive, and he conveyed how much he missed her. "All that matters now is that you're back," he exclaimed, grinning. "As for Luna, she's in prison and she'll never harm you again." Famous last words, Finn. Meanwhile, Bill returned home to his mansion and told Katie and Will that that vile creature had not reached him. He even laughed when Luna thought using the word grandchild would function like open sesame on her detention cell door. Finally, in prison, Luna's cellmate snickered that her sugar daddy hadn't come to her rescue. Luna responded by saying, "I need you to do it again," which meant beating her up. "Just not the stomach," Luna quickly added. Her cellmate was more than happy to oblige. Bill, however, had different plans. He was Mia's father, a guy who had come and gone from their lives like a storm cloud, leaving chaos in his wake. When he arrived last year, clean-shaven and promising stability, Luna was skeptical but desperate. Didn't Mia deserve a father? And Bill, with his slick remarks and sudden curiosity, appeared to be ready to take the initiative. He'd offered financial assistance, a shared custody agreement, and the opportunity for Luna to breathe. She had trusted him not because she wanted to, but because she needed to. For Mia, that trust was her downfall. Bill's assurances were a ruse, a skillfully orchestrated trap. Within months he'd flipped the script, accusing Luna of neglect, instability, and being unfit. He had money, a lawyer, and the ability to manipulate the truth. Luna, with an overloaded schedule and hardly enough money to pay the rent, couldn't compete. The court proceedings were a whirl of legal jargon and harsh glances, with Bill's counsel portraying her as a failure and Bill sitting smugly, his eyes gleaming with success. The judge's gavel fell like a guillotine, separating Luna from her daughter. They claimed Bill would have temporary custody. Temporary till Luna can prove herself. Then followed the arrest. The charges were thin, a patchwork of lies about theft and fraud devised by Bill to cement her doom. He had framed her by planting evidence in her apartment, including a falsified check and a stolen necklace from his sister's residence. Luna lacked an alibi, resources, and the ability to fight back. The cops had arrived in the middle of the night, their beams piercing the darkness while Mia's cries rang in her ears. "Mommy, do not go," her daughter wailed, clinging to her leg. Luna's heart had broken, but she faked a smile and whispered, "I'll be back, baby. I promise." That promise was all she had left, a thin thread keeping her together in this cell. The prison was a universe unto itself, where time passed slowly and hope faded. Luna's days were a dreary loop of colorless meals, yelled directives, and the persistent hum of misery from the other prisoners. She remained to herself, avoiding the cliques and fights, her thoughts set on Mia. Every night she'd lie awake, replaying memories of her daughter's laughter, the feel of her tiny hand in hers, and the books they'd read together under a blanket fort. Those memories were a lifeline for her, but they were also a source of pain, a reminder of what she had lost. Bill's influence extended even here. Word had spread among the guards about his connections, money, and determination to keep Luna locked up. Her appeals were delayed, and her counsel was busy and underpaid. Every letter she sent to Mia was returned unopened, with Bill's name scratched across the envelope as the sender. He gradually erased her from her daughter's existence. The other convicts pitied her, but it did not help. It simply exacerbated the pain in her chest, the weight of knowing she was receding from Mia's life. However, Luna refused to give up. She'd grown up fighting poverty, doubt, and a world that seemed intent on breaking her. In her cell, she began to strategize, her intellect sharper than ever despite her tiredness. She listened, observed, and pieced together bits of information from other convicts. Jenkins, the softest of the guards, occasionally smuggled extra bread to the women who appeared to be the most shattered. Carlos, a maintenance worker, spent too much time discussing the prison's layout and security flaws. And there was Sarah, a pro bono lawyer who came once a month, her eyes gentle but exhausted, offering a glimmer of hope to those who dared to inquire. Luna's idea was irresponsible, a desperate bet driven by necessity. She referred to it as punching up, a term she'd learned from an old acquaintance who had overcome insurmountable obstacles. It wasn't about breaking out exactly. It was about compelling the system to see her, hear her, and admit the injustice that had cost her life. She began modestly, writing letters to Sarah, outlining every element of her case, including every lie Bill had told. She drew diagrams of the evidence, timelines of his visits, and anything she could remember. Her hands shook as she wrote, but she didn't pause. She could not. Jenkins was her next target. Luna studied him, noticing his mannerisms and friendliness. One evening as he passed by her cell, she slipped him a note, folded so tightly it could have been a rock. "Please," she said softly but steadily. "For my daughter." Jenkins hesitated, his eyes flashing with doubt, but accepted the note. It was risky, but Luna had nothing to lose. The note was simple, a request for him to transport her letters to Sarah, bypassing the prison's mail system, which she knew Bill had hacked. Days stretched into weeks, and Luna's hope faded. Jenkins had not returned, and her messages to Sarah remained unanswered. The other convicts observed her stillness and developing pallor, but did not inquire. They recognized the expression of someone on the verge of losing control. Then, when the jail lights dimmed, Jenkins appeared in her cell. He didn't say anything, simply handed a small, crumpled packet between the bars. Sarah's note inside said, "I'm working on it." Luna's pulse raced, a delicate spark of possibility blazing in her chest. Sarah's work was slow and meticulous, but it was noteworthy. She discovered inconsistencies in the evidence, gaps in Bill's account that not even his money could fill. She had called a journalist named Claire, who specialized in exposing corruption. Claire's stories began to acquire traction, causing minor ripples in the local press that hinted at a larger tale. Luna's case was more than simply a file in a drawer. It was a spark, a whisper of injustice that could ignite into a conflagration. But time is harsh. Luna's health was deteriorating, as stress and starvation took their toll. Her once thick and dark hair was thinning, and her hands trembled as she attempted to write. She was always thinking about Mia, wondering if her daughter remembered her, and if Bill had poisoned her mind with lies. The thought cut deep, but it also fueled her. She began speaking with the other inmates, telling her story and encouraged them to share theirs. The cell block, previously a place of calm and submission, began to vibrate with silent defiance. Women who had given up started writing their own letters, whispering their own intentions. Luna's defiance was contagious. Carlos, the maintenance man, spilled a secret that changed everything. The prison surveillance cameras had a blind spot, a little nook near the wash facility that the lenses couldn't reach. It wasn't much, but it was sufficient. Luna's plan evolved, and her punching up took on a new form. She didn't wish to flee in the sense that the movies depicted. She wanted to be seen. She wanted the world to know what Bill had done, and what the system had permitted. With the support of two other inmates, Maria and Tanya, she organized a plan to stage a protest, a silent, forceful stand in that blind spot, holding banners scrawled with their truths, framed by greed, justice for Luna, free the innocent. The day of the protest was charged with tension. Luna's heart raced as she and the others sneaked inside the wash area, their signs hidden beneath their uniforms. They stood in the blind spot, their expressions fixed and their hands calm. The guards discovered too late, and the women did not resist. They stood silently, their signs raised and their eyes filled with defiance. The prison erupted in pandemonium, but Luna felt oddly tranquil. For the first time in months she felt alive. Claire, the journalist, became aware of the demonstration. The following day, her story, a scathing exposé of Luna's case, Bill's manipulations, and the prison's cooperation, made the first page. The story expanded, getting picked up by major outlets and disseminated on social media. Protesters gathered outside the prison, their voices raised where Luna's had been muted. Sarah launched a new plea, armed with public backing and new evidence. Bill's carefully built world started to shatter. Luna wasn't sure if she would win. The system was slow, brutal, and frequently insensitive to the powerless. But as she sat in her cell reading Claire's piece, smuggled in by Jenkins, she felt a flash of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She had punched up and everyone had noticed. Mia's face was still fresh in Luna's mind, and for the first time she believed she could honor her vow. She would be back. For her daughter. For herself. The rain rained so heavily on the day of the verdict that it turned the courthouse steps gray. Luna sat there long after everyone else had left, her hair matted to her cheeks and her hands quivering over the solitary piece of paper that now defined the rest of her existence. Custody was denied. The words glared back at her, like an open wound that refused to close. Her lawyer, Bill, had already left, saying something about appeals, but his eyes were closed. He'd given up before she had, and the truth of his apathy resonated through her chest like the empty clang of a cell door. It wasn't only about losing her kid, Noah. It was about being removed from his destiny. She had spent the last 2 years attempting to demonstrate that the woman she used to be had vanished. That her mistakes, the nights when she couldn't stay clean, and the people she trusted who let her down didn't define her. But in the end it didn't matter. Bill had failed her, the system had failed her, and now, sitting in the mist outside the courthouse, she felt herself drifting back into that peaceful place where grief gives way to acceptance. By evening, she was back in the little pallid room that had been her world, the women's ward of the state jail prison. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead remained constant, and the aroma of bleach and something metallic hovered in the air. Her bunkmate, Carla, looked up from her crossword work as Luna entered. "Are you okay?" she inquired softly, even though she already knew the answer. Luna nodded once and the lie became routine. She climbed into the bottom bunk, turned her face to the wall, and let her tears fall silently onto the pillow. She remembered Noah, his wide brown eyes, the way he used to tug on her sleeve and say, "Come on, Mommy, the sun's up." She hadn't seen him in person in 3 years. He'd be almost 7 now. Too old to remember her lullabies, too little to understand why she'd left. Her crime was not violent. It was not greed. It was desperation, stealing prescription medicines from the pharmacy where she worked, believing she could sell them to pay for rehab. The irony stings. The medicine she stole to rescue herself ended up binding her to a life she could never leave. When the cops arrived, she didn't run. She remembers standing there with the plastic bag in her hand, the fluorescent lights buzzing like condemnation. Years later, the prison walls felt like a reminder of every poor decision she'd ever made. And Bill, her attorney and purported advocate, looked at her today with exhausted eyes. "There's nothing more we can do, Luna," he added. "The judge has made a decision. You are not going to get custody. Not now, maybe never." Those words played over and over in her head, louder each time, until they drowned out everything else. The next morning, Luna awoke before dawn. The guards hadn't begun their rounds yet, and the world was still dim in the early light. She sat at the metal desk next her bunk and took out the only notepad she owned. On the first page, she scribbled Noah's name in shaking letters. Then she started writing a letter, not to him, but to the version of herself who used to believe things could be fixed. "Dear Luna," she wrote, "you believed you could make things right by being kind and obeying all the rules. But goodness does not guarantee redemption. It makes no difference to what others remember about you. They'll always see the worst parts, even if you've burned the rest away." She paused, putting the pen against her lips. Carla shifted in her sleep, saying something about the ocean. Luna smiled softly. She had never seen the ocean. She promised herself that if she ever got out, she'd find a place to stand on the beach and let the sea wash over her feet. Promises, however, were flimsy in prison, breaking just as quickly as hope. By breakfast, she had folded the note and hidden it under her mattress. She wasn't sure why she was storing it. Perhaps someday, someone will read it and realize who she was beyond the inmate number embroidered into her uniform. Days passed in a steady rhythm. Roll call, supper, work detail, and lights out. Every moment seemed like a bead on a string that she couldn't cut. Bill stopped answering her letters. She imagined he'd chosen another case, one that wouldn't tarnish his reputation. That revelation burned more intensely than anything. It was more than just a legal loss. It was personal. He once informed her that he believed in second chances. She had wanted to believe him. Then one afternoon, while scrubbing floors in the hospital, she overheard two nurses discussing a new rehabilitation program, one that could decrease offenders' sentences if they completed it and shown substantial improvement. "They're only taking a handful," one nurse remarked, looking around. "You must have someone on the outside push your paperwork through." Luna's heart constricted. Someone is on the outside. She was alone now. There were no family members remaining who would answer her phone calls. There were no lawyers who still cared. But the concept sank into her consciousness like a flame into kindling. "If there is a way out, I will find it." That night, she sought Carla for assistance. Carla had been inside longer, so she knew how to get things done. "I need to find someone who can talk to the warden," Luna whispered, barely above a whisper. "Someone who can help me get into that program." Carla examined her for a time, her eyes warm with sympathy. "You still believe you can win the custody case, huh?" "It's not about winning anymore," Luna stated. "It's about being someone he'd be proud of." Carla groaned and agreed. "All right. I'll see what I can do." Luna waited weeks before hearing anything. During that time, she pushed herself into work, assisting in the kitchen, teaching other inmates to read, and volunteering for any task that no one else wanted. She began to feel a spark of something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Every letter she wrote to Noah she kept buried, knowing it would never be delivered. She wrote about the stars, the books she was reading, and how she was learning to heal broken things, including herself. Then one morning, shortly before roll call, a guard stopped by her cell. "Martinez, the warden wants to see you." Luna's stomach plummeted. Her pulse drummed in her ears as she walked to the warden's office, which felt forever. When she walked in, she was surprised to discover not only the warden, but also Bill, her old lawyer, sitting there with his tie slightly askew, as if he had not slept. "I didn't expect to see you again," she murmured quietly, her tone sour. He looked up at her with remorse on his face. "You were right," he replied. "I gave up too early. I should not have. I've been working with the State Rehabilitation Board. I believe I can get you into the new release program. But you need to do something for me."